Hey everybody, Professor Bentley with the second short video. We will be going over the first three topics you can choose from in Unit 2 discussion board. Before I dive into that though, one thing I was supposed to go over in my first video, sorry about that, was the peer responses and my grading criteria sheet. So let me briefly go over those before I dive into the three topics. Your peer response post, you have to respond to two of your fellow classmates. And I love my students, y'all are very supportive of each other, but don't just leave it at great job, John, great job, Sarah. It's no, you got to delve more into it. Tailor the post to your classmates' post, okay? And you need to answer the following questions. What did you learn from your classmates' post? Are there connections, what you learned from your source and what you learned from their source or about their source? What is one interesting thing you learned from your fellow classmates' post? And what clarification do you need regarding the post? These peer responses are what's going to be due on the 15th of October. Okay, now next, your grading criteria sheet. I will be using this to grade your Unit 2 discussion board. Firstly, your context section. Student identifies the creator, including a brief description. Student identifies when and where the document was created. I'm going to put my comments, and I'm going to put however many points out of 20 you get for that section. Summary, student fully summarizes the document and identifies the main topic, the main points, and at least one interesting detail. My comments, how many points out of 20? Connection, student identifies connection between the primary source and the unit learning materials. Student includes a discussion of how the source expanded or changed their previous knowledge. My comments, how many points out of 15? Peer responses, you answer to two of your classmates on time, you will get the 10 points. Easy peasy. Okay, next, response content. Peer responses add new depth or insight to the current conversation and encourages further conversation. Encourages further conversation is pretty key. So my comments, how many comments out of 5? Remember, after October 15th, your responses will no longer be accepted. So get those in on time because you will lose 15 points right off the bat. Don't do that, okay? Academic writing, student uses proper spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Write clearly and effectively. References, if provided, are in APA format. My comments, how many points out of 5? I tally these points up, and it's however many points out of 75, okay? So that's the grading criteria sheet. Keep this basically in your mind as a blueprint for when you are constructing this assignment. Okay, so again, to reiterate, to review, your initial discussion board post is due Friday, October 11th by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Your peer response posts are due October 15th by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. You can always email me, lbenelocaro@tech.edu if you have any questions. Message me through CTU Messenger. I'm here for you. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. We're going to go over the first three topic choices right now. Bay of Pigs is your first. 1959, there was a revolution in Cuba that brought the communist government of Fidel Castro to power. Plans for the Bay of Pigs invasion actually were formulated during the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower in the 50s. Okay, Dwight D. Eisenhower was president from 1953 to 1961, and this was at the end of Eisenhower's presidency. The plan was being formulated, but there was not enough time to put it into motion while Eisenhower was president. So Kennedy inherited this plan. The CIA had been secretly training Cuban exiles in Guatemala, and Kennedy was informed of this when he took office in January of 1961. The exiles were set to land in a portion of Cuba called the Bay of Pigs. It was hoped that the invasion and the exiles would motivate Cubans to rise up against Castro and oust him. Unfortunately, that did not happen. We'll get into this. April of 1961 is when the Bay of Pigs invasion actually occurred. U.S. government was to aid the exiles with 2 airstrikes. However, after the first airstrike, the U.S. government knew that its cover had been blown. So President Kennedy canceled the second airstrike, angering the Cuban community. About 1,200, that sounds a little better, exiles were taken prisoner and 100 were killed. President Kennedy eventually negotiated the release of all the imprisoned exiles. The second topic I want to go over with you involves Cuba, but it happened about a year and a half later. A lot of people confuse the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Don't. The Bay of Pigs occurred in April of 1961, And the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred a year and a half later in October 1962, a very tense 13 days. October 1962, U.S. military surveillance planes were photographing nuclear missile sites being constructed in Cuba by the Soviet Union. The Kennedy administration had two choices in regards to responding to this information. Firstly, an invasion of Cuba, which with the Bay of Pigs fiasco a year and a half before, not such a great choice. And secondly, place a naval blockade against Cuba. The Kennedy administration went with a naval blockade against Cuba because it was feared that an invasion would lead to intervention by the Soviet Union and, really an expansive war. Negotiations during the Cuban Missile Crisis lasted a very tense 13 days. It was the closest the U.S. has ever come to being involved in nuclear war. It was incredibly, incredibly intense. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy wrote of his experience as a cabinet member during the crisis within his famous book, 13 Days. Highly recommend reading it. It's a great book. It was eventually turned into a movie, 13 Days, that I'm sure you can stream, get from your local library, whatever nowadays. The Soviets removed the missiles from Cuba in exchange for the U.S. promise not to invade Cuba. What was not known to the American public until recently is the fact that the U.S. had agreed to remove its missiles from Turkey and Greece as part of the negotiations of the Cuban Missile Crisis. When kids growing up during the Cold War were taught, darn it, we stared down the Soviets and they blinked and they removed their missiles from Cuba. Well, not exactly that cut and dry. We had also agreed to remove our missiles from Turkey and Greece. Okay, the last topic I want to go over in this short video is the Vietnam War protests. John Kerry gave this speech in front of Congress April 23rd, 1971. He was a disgruntled Vietnam vet coming back, disillusioned Vietnam vet coming back from fighting in the war. And he gave this impassioned speech on April 23rd, 1971, where he spoke out against the war and pled against the war to Congress. He would eventually serve as U.S. Senator from Massachusetts from 1985 until 2013, and he was our Democratic Party nominee in 2004 for the presidential race. He served as Secretary of State under President Obama from 2013 to 2017. From 1966 until 1970, he served as lieutenant in the United States Navy fighting in Vietnam. And of course, this was his famous speech that he gave coming home. And he was a member of the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. That's who he's speaking on behalf. This was a group that was formed in 1967, consisting of those that served in Vietnam that were now opposed to the war. He was chosen to give this speech before a congressional committee in April 1971. So that's the document you will be reading for that topic. Okay, I will be going over the last three topics in my third video.